Hi, I'm Shirley Esthimer, and this is Artspace. And today I have a good longtime friend, Gary Paholic, whom you all know as an actor and a singer and a dancer and you name it. But today he's here for a different reason.
Thank you, Shirley, for having me once again. And I'm here to talk a little bit about scenic design and scenic painting, which is what I do for a living. As we all know, it's very hard to make your living in the arts, and even doing this kind of work it is, but especially hard as a performer. So this is something that I really enjoy as much as performing. And so I'm here to show you some set models and blueprints and plans and talk a little about scenic design.
Well, let's, I did have a question I wanted to be sure and ask you. When you were at the Boston Conservatory, were you totally consumed with the acting and the singing part, or did you get a chance to study any set design?
Well, I studied in a hands-on way because there is, being a conservatory and not a university or a college, typical college setting, the focus is really on the performing and very intense with the acting classes, dance classes, private voice lessons once a week for all the students, plus musical theater classes. So the focus is really on performing at the conservatory. And there isn't really a design program, but of course they do have designers and technical directors, and they do create scenery for the productions that they put on at the conservatory. So what I would always do is, as a work study student, I would work with the designer, Pat Trapp, who was the designer there at the time that I attended the conservatory, and I learned a lot from her. A great lady, and she was very, very talented, very good designer, excellent scenic artist.
I can believe that. I've seen many of their productions.
She's studied in Brussels, so I learned a lot from her about mixing colors and scenic painting techniques, and you know, I would watch and learn basically. So
well, let's pretend for a few moments that I have just hired you to design my production of Oklahoma.
Okay.
Where do we go from there?
Where we would start is with an initial meeting where I would want to know from you as the director of the production what your concept is of the show, and whether you envisioned the show being presented in a realistic fashion, more imaginative, a certain style, that type of thing. And then we'd talk a little bit about the physical requirements that you would have and that the choreographer would have in terms of space for dance numbers. And then we would also get into more detail. You may have a list of questions for me. You may request certain things. You may want the farmhouse to be practical, and that would be a theater term for being more real, if you will.
Or even putting it on a turntable, so that it can become something else. Is that what you mean?
And you may want it to be done in a very realistic fashion, or you may not. You may say, you know, I really want the front door, I want the porch for Aunt Eller to sit on, I want the door to be able to open, I want it to feel like it's a real farmhouse. Or you may say, you know, I see the play in a very imaginative way, and I'd like to see just the suggestion of a farmhouse or a skeletal outline of the farmhouse, or that type of thing. So you would give me your ideas, and then I would go back to my studio and do some sketches, and I wouldn't go as far as a scale model at that point, but I would do some pencil sketches and maybe some ground plans, and a ground plan would be the floor plan, basically. I would need measurements and dimensions of the stage where we're going to be performing the show. And if there aren't blueprints available, architects' blueprints, which oftentimes in these old spaces or the schools, they, you know, those are long lost documents. So you take your basic measurements, and we would talk about all different kinds of things. What we have available for a fly system, which would be the pipes, the battens up above. Do we have the ability to fly backdrops in and out? Can we do what's called dead hanging a backdrop, which would mean the pipe doesn't move, but we can hang a backdrop of a sky? Then I would come back to you. We'd have our second meeting. I would show you the sketches, and you'd be able to say, well, either you like the direction we're going in, or that's not really exactly what you envisioned, or I like most of it, but could you change this? And then you may have some more questions. So that it's a long process. Then I would go back again, now that I know I can incorporate the changes that you wanted made. Now I would come back to you hopefully with a scale model. And that would be probably unpainted, but it would be in half-inch to the foot scale at that point, just to see if in physical terms we're talking the same language. Also, I find that these are very helpful for the builders, the carpenters who are going to be executing the design. Although they would have generally a little bit better ability to look at a front view, a side view, a top view, a plan view of drawings and figure out the physical set. But most directors think in a very visual way, and they're not necessarily carpenters, and a three-dimensional model really shows them in miniature exactly how that set's going to look.
What the effect's going to be. Now, if we can back up a little bit, I'm going to make an assumption that right after I hired you to do Oklahoma, that you sat down and studied the script. And why would you study the script?
I would go back to study the script because I'm going to bring something to it as a designer myself. I'm going to take your ideas and concepts, and you're absolutely right. First and foremost, I should actually come to the meeting having already read the script. And if it's a musical, being familiar with the music and the style of the music and the score and the lyrics, and make my own decisions about what the play has to say and what feelings I get from the play. And then we have a lot of technical basic requirements, which would be the weather, the time of day. Is it evening? Is it the time period? The time period. What location? Are we in Europe? Are we in America? Are we in New England? You know, and then do some research on what did the farmhouses look like? What colors of paint did they use? How weathered would it be? How rich or poor is the family? Could they have afforded to paint the house in a while? So there's all these different considerations, I think, that go into it's a process of elimination. Answering all of these questions, I think, helps to lead you to make the decisions artistically.
I would think you could get just from dialogue or the words to the music could give you a clue.
Definitely. I think that could give you a feeling of whether the show is whimsical, playful, light, and colorful, a little bit more serious or somber. I think the approach to a Tennessee Williams drama would be a very different design than Bye Bye Birdie, High School Musical, which I think is done in a very fun style most of the time, lighthearted, colorful.
Well, my good friend Ron Dion, who was over at Turtle Lane designing sets, said you have to be as concerned with where the set's going to go and be stored when you're not using it.
That's true. Wing space is a big consideration. Also, you know, storage of furniture and pieces and props. Enough space for the actors, how big the cast will be, how many people will be waiting in the wings to come on for group scenes, how many people are there available to move the sets. Is there a crew, a technical crew? And space is a big consideration. Space from even the scenic shop. Will things fit out the door when they're built? Do they have to be built in sections and pieces intended to be taken apart once they're built and painted, taken apart, brought on site to the theater and then put back together again, unless they're building right on stage, which we do.
So at what point, and then I want you to have a word about each one of these, we'll start with Oklahoma, but at what point do you get your choreographer and your props people, and as well as the director, all who have their own concerns?
In a musical, generally it's nice to have the choreographer at the first meeting with the director, or at least the second meeting. Because generally the director will have already met with the choreographer and have some idea of what he or she wants for space considerations, but it's just as important in a musical to involve the choreographer as early on as possible, just as
would
important
think
as
so.
the director, because space is a big consideration and they may have some ideas in mind about levels, different platforms and levels, and how they can actually use the set for the choreography. If you are doing Oklahoma and they need the entire stage completely cleared for the Dream Ballet, you have to think about how big the farmhouse and the smokehouse and the barn and these big pieces, where are they going to go? The Skidmore Ranch pieces that are waiting in the wings for Act 2, in order to give that choreographer the complete open stage. Not only visually, because it's a dream and it would be a different feeling, a different setting, but also for space, because it's a big ballet and a lot of dancers.
And of course, we don't want to forget the lighting designer.
And the lighting designer.
Because that
right.
interaction,
Right.
I would think the lighting designer might possibly make or break a set if they weren't tuned in. And you think of that too, don't you?
Definitely. I think that's a big consideration, because going back to what you're saying about involving team members, the lighting designer needs to be involved as early as possible, and the props and set dressing person generally works pretty closely with the designer, so that the style is consistent with the props and the set dressing. As far as the lighting designer, it can make or break a set, because if you're using bright, clean colors on something like Disney's Beauty and the Beast, which I'm painting right now, which are the real saturated Disney colors, or your bright, colorful primary colors for something like Good Man Charlie Brown or Bye Bye Birdie. The lighting gels, which are the transparent, I'm not sure if our viewers are familiar with that term gel, but it would be a transparent colored piece of celluloid or plastic that goes over the light, and that it's a filter so that the lights can be all different colors and shades. And if they use an amber gel or more golden warm tone, which is great on the faces and works really well for Fiddler on the Roof or Oklahoma, that can actually greatly affect clean, bright colors and take the life out of those colors on the set. So and the costumes. So it's very important.
Yeah, I was going to mention the costumes.
And the costume designer is also a very, very important person in terms of the scenic designer, because
how the costumes are going to look against the set. Yeah,
exactly. And whether again, if the whole show is going to be approached in a really imaginative style or a really realistic style, because if the costumes are in one genre and the set is in a different genre, that doesn't look as cohesive as one total vision of everybody working as a team for that one vision of that production. So,
could we have a few words about each one of these sets?
Sure.
Probably viewers will recognize a number of them, but let's identify them. And maybe, do you want to start with Oklahoma?
Well, I'd love to start with Oklahoma,
because we've been talking about it. Yeah.
And the reason is because you talked about space, and since space is a consideration, budget is a consideration, time is a consideration with most theater companies. I will often design with a multi-purpose set piece in mind, especially for high schools and community theaters. This is Oklahoma. This is the farmhouse, which was seen on stage right with the windmill piece. And we had a backdrop. We had a ground row, which is like a theater term for a landscape piece in the back. And then, to change the set a little bit, we turned it around, and it's the barn on the back. So as long as the carpenters are building the set anyway, they might as well finish it off and get some use out of it. And since they're building the whole structure and we have an inside, we might as well finish the inside and make it into the smokehouse. Because that way we're not building an entirely separate piece, and we're not storing separate pieces, and we're not spending so much budget money on 3 different set pieces. So you're accomplishing a lot. And it's also for the students, the high school students,